Welcome back, AP. All right, so let's go ahead and pick up where we left off. Quick couple of updates, though. I want to go ahead and throw these things out there. Please remember to go on to Google Classroom and make sure you join the AP European History Google Classroom. Go ahead and get out in front of that. As I can already see, apparently 12 of you have already done that, which is awesome, but I think there's still about 5 of you out there that haven't quite done that yet, so make sure you get on top of that because it provides a great area for resources that I'll post from time to time. It also gives you just a better ability of contacting the material, coming into contact with old flips so you don't have to wade through the expanse that is my YouTube channel and things like that, right? So go ahead and make sure that you're joined up with this. And if you already are joined up with this, then good on you, all right? Very, very nice job going ahead and getting that done. I saw Kimberly right up there on the very, very top of the list. Great job. Now, a couple of y'all did notice something, though. A couple of y'all were trying to go ahead and download the AP Renaissance section study cover, all right? So these are really, really helpful. These are study covers that I make for them to go electronically in the front of your notes and or physically in the front of your notes if you're more of a handwriting type student, right? Which is completely okay because you're going to be receiving an email probably in the next 24 hours discussing how I'm going to check all of your stuff. There will be handwriting provisions. There will be areas for people who like to handwrite. I don't discourage either one. If you would like to handwrite all of your notes, go for it. If you would like to type all of your notes, go for it. I know I'm a handwriting person. I have to write everything by hand. I still, to this day, prefer pen and paper over a computer any day of the week. Don't ask me why. Like, if my teacher gave me one of these study covers, chances are, more than likely, I'm probably going to print that thing out so I can highlight it and stuff. But just so you know what these things are, these are great little kind of outlines to the units before we even start them. Now, sad part is, a couple y'all have tried to already download them, and myself, unbeknownst to me, did somehow not make them completely available for you. A couple of y'all tried to click on it, and then I got an email saying someone is trying to request access to this document. And I sent y'all some emails back saying, oh, hey, just click on it and make a copy. Don't request access to it. One of y'all could have sent me an email back saying, hey, Mr. Terry, tried to do that, still didn't work. Please reach out, email me. But I did fix it. It is now completely available to anybody with an Archbishop Chappelle email address, and all you got to do is make a copy of it for yourself, and then you can kind of be able to use it. Now, keep in mind, though, this is a very clear disclaimer. These are up for editing at any time, all right? So if I think that, for example, right, watch. There are a bunch of really great key terms right here that we will be using a lot, right? Like you got the Signories, mercenary armies, rationalism, empiricism, all this crazy stuff coming up throughout. And this is just to kind of give you like a general outline, right? A general outline. Josie, stop licking the pillow. Ugh, sorry, my wife's poodle is just over there licking the pillow. Such an ingrate. All right, so anyway, now, really quick though. They're up for editing at any time, okay? Because, like, for example, let's take this thing right here. Virtue, right? Virtue is the Renaissance concept of an individual investing the most of themselves into their craft to try and create the best possible product. I don't think it's going to be on the AP test, and I think it's a very generic and mundane term. So, look, I'm just going to take it off. I'm just taking it off, right? So now, to help some of you out, I might instead do one of these bad boys, right? I might do the, what's the thing? How do I do the strike through? What's the strike through? Can I do that still? Is that like a thing you can do? Like, oh, yeah. I might go like, and wow, you can't do that anymore. Well, I'll probably just end up deleting it then. So I'll just go, bam, and I'll delete it, right? So just be wary. If you see something on there and be like, oh, Mr. Terry, I couldn't find virtue in the notes, then go back and check this from time to time and see if I deleted that term, all right? It's not that it's not important to the study of AP European history. It's just that that's kind of a mundane, ticky-tack thing that you're not going to see on the test and you're never going to bring up in your writing, so I'm just getting rid of it, right? It's something that you might, like, go over if you're like majoring in history, but it's not necessarily important for an AP European class. at the high school level, right? So, but this is a good place to start, and it has study guide questions that go along with it, which are really, really helpful. Now, remember though, AP European history is much more about the overarching themes and understanding the movements themselves. Do not freak yourself out if you do not know every single person on this thing. It's really okay, all right? So, because we might add to this list, and by might, we are going to add to this list of high Renaissance artists. We might add to this list of, like, key places, right? A lot of different things can happen. This just gives you a general outline of where we're going, all right? But let's go ahead and get back into what we're actually here to do. Let's go ahead and get back into understanding what the heck is going on in Europe, right? We were like in the Rome and the Middle Ages and then, right? And all this other crazy stuff is going on. We're getting into the moment where we're about to clearly enter into the Renaissance period, all right? And we left off right here with Cellini's sculpture of Perseus holding the head of Medusa, right? One of my very favorites. This guy, not on your study cover. Doesn't mean he's not cool to know. Doesn't mean that it might not be a nice little piece of information that you could use when you're writing something for the AP test, right? Using the realistic human like anatomy, like trying to explain how art kind of leapt forward during this period coming out of the Middle Ages. Actually a huge fan of. I really love one of his other ones. It's called the Cellini Salt Cellar, but we'll bring that up later on to kind of talk about like absolutism and the growth of all this crazy stuff. Good old Francis I of France. Now, getting into it though, let's go ahead and kind of do a little overlap review of the things that we've talked about up to this point, right? So we talked briefly about the tragedy of the late Middle Ages and how that's going to affect the European economic landscape, surprisingly for the positive, right? It's going to increase the value of labor. It's going to increase wages, and it's going to reduce food costs for regular European citizens, leading to their economic prosperity. So, ironically enough, the tragedy of the late Middle Ages kind of helped seed the fire, or like, sow the seeds. That's the word I'm looking for, the phrase I'm looking for. Sow the seeds of the Renaissance, right? And we got into new economic techniques, specifically the growth of economic patterns when it comes to overseas trade. We talked about sedentary merchants, resident merchants, the Commenda system, that middleman system, right? The rise of family firms and all these other great, amazing concepts, particularly the Medicis and the Sforza briefly, and then we got into them a little bit more later. We also then continued with the growth of new financial techniques. We talked about double entry bookkeeping, credits and loans, bills of exchange, and how the resurgence of money, especially into northern Italy, we'll get into them in a second, but especially into northern Italy, particularly out of Venice and radiating from that area, is going to see the growth of the Renaissance because of the massive amounts of funds coming back to Europe that had been very absent during the Middle Ages. And then we continued to talk about where did the Renaissance begin, and we located it in northern Italy. And we talked about the establishments of communes and their removal from the feudal system, giving them the ability to grow, right? We then went into the social stratification of the communes, the the merchant elite, the popolo grassa, the popolo minuto, right? Like these big different variations. We talked about how the popolo are going to feel disenfranchised by the merchant elite trying to decide who can be a citizen, and they're going to have riots, and they're going to try to gain republic status, which they did. They actually ended up getting this republic status in the form of what is known as a Signoria or a Signoria, right? Now, we talked about how pretty much in Milan and Florence, it's not really a republic because the Signorias were kind of rigged, right? These rich, wealthy families like the Sforza and the Medici would use their clout and their funds to rig the elections of these major guilds, right? These major guilds when they would appoint a person to represent their guild on the city board or the Signoria. Now, the Medici pretty much ended up de facto running Florence for over 200 years. So we talked about how they're like not true republics, but they're a step in the right direction all the same. We talked about the rise of the Medici and the Sforza, and we particularly went into a brick-and-mortar understanding of Milan, Venice, and Florence, the big hotbeds of the Renaissance. We particularly spent quite a bit of time in Florence, because Florence is what is known as the cradle of the Renaissance, which brings us back to this, right? Which brings us back to Cellini's beautiful sculpture of Perseus holding the head of Medusa in Florence. took this picture. You ever get a chance, make sure you go out and get there. It's a very, very cool thing. It's in their sculpture garden. There's also, I believe there's the Raven Sabine woman is in that one as well. It's a lot of amazing sculptures in that actual little sculpture area outside. Also, fun fact, if you know what Michelangelo's David is, the David was meant to actually go into this sculpture garden, but they decided it was so amazing that it had to be moved indoors into the Uffizi Gallery much later. There's actually a replica of it that sits out there now. So getting into it, though, we're now going to kind of expand out, right? We started talking about northern Italy being the hub of the Renaissance, where it all truly gets kicked off. This big return of finances and economics. The Venetians are creating trade embargoes with the Byzantinians and the Ottomans, and they're flushing cash into northern Italy. But Europe is not just northern Italy. So what the heck is everybody else doing? What's the other major city in Italy doing? What's the rest of Europe doing during this time? What are we seeing there? Are we seeing power growth? Are we seeing power recession? What are we talking about here? Well, let's start with their next door neighbor that happens to be one of the biggest players when it comes to any type of government, economics, or religious hierarchy that you actually could ever get into. And that big boy is that none other than Rome, right? Because we got to talk about what the heck is going on in Rome, which is the seat of power for the papacy, and what's going on in Northern Europe, which is the seat of power for the feudal system, and particularly this is the strife point, right? This is the animosity between Rome, the papacy, and the kingdoms and what's the word I'm looking for? The kingdoms and the lordships of Northern Europe, right? We got kings that think they want all their power. We got a pope that believes his power supersedes theirs with his papal suprematic ideas. Papal supremacy is papal suprematic. Now, anyway, going forward, though, Rome, in a nutshell, is the Papal States, okay? I'm going to back it out real quick just so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Rome is not the Rome that it once was anymore. Rome used to be an empire that expanded over 2/3 of the entire continent of Europe and into Asia Minor, right? So now, though, Rome is just a city within the greater Papal States, okay? And the Papal States is run almost by a de facto monarchy of a new pope, all right? Every time a new pope was elected, they ruled directly over the Papal States. And for those of you who are already reading Michelangelo and the Pope's Ceiling, as you should be, Julius II, the pope that paid for the Sistine Chapel to be built, or not be built, paid for the Sistine Chapel to be painted, is a great example of that monarchical power of popes that they began to claim as time went on. There's also a small story in there as well of Alexander, I believe it's the 6th, Alexander the 6th, who used to be Rodrigue Borgia, and his son, Caesar Borgia. Yeah, popes aren't supposed to be having kids, are they, right? His illegitimate son, actually creating like a little bit of a power struggle in some northern Italian areas. But these new popes, their priorities were focused particularly on the expansion of territory and bringing foreign governments under their thumb, right? Particularly during the High Renaissance, getting into the High Renaissance, they wanted to bring outside kingdoms under their control, right? They didn't want them appointing their own bishops, remember, i.e. the investiture crisis that we talked about back. I need to add that to the study cover. Don't let me forget. Now, we're talking about that, and also just kind of owning their power and accruing financial gain as much as possible. The big thing about the Papal States is it did become a massive hub of wealth. There was a huge influx of cash coming into the Papal States, not in the same way that it was going on in northern Italy, though. In northern Italy, Milan, Florence, and Venice, their cash was coming to them by the way of, for example, Milan being a trade hub, Venice being the trade partner of the Byzantinians and the Ottoman Empire, Florence being a textile manufacturing and as well as a banking capital of most of Europe. They were making their money. Rome didn't make money in the same conventional sense. When any city or group prospered in Europe, the Papal States got a large cut of their goods due to the fact of this thing known as the tithe, T-I-T-H-E. That's the 10% donation that all European citizens are expected to give to the church on a weekly basis. That money is then funneled back into the Papal States, where it is then redistributed out. So the tithe was almost like a tax during the medieval era. And when I say almost like a tax, it pretty much was a tax. So with that, you saw a huge influx of cash going into Rome because since economics were now returning to Europe, you're now seeing Rome getting very, very wealthy. Now, the best examples of Renaissance art, many of them are actually located in Rome due to the wealth that the church began to grow in insane levels, okay? So, and again, the tithe, the expansion of those economics. Excuse me. Now, anyway, so as the economics expanded, the tithe expanded, and some of the best examples are still there. For example, the Sistine Chapel ceiling is in Rome. For example, what else is there? Oh, God. Oh, sorry. The School of Athens is also in Rome, amongst many, many other different designs of buildings. Oh, St. Peter's Basilica, where the Pope actually lives, like St. Peter's Basilica, where he lives and also gives Mass every single day. The dome of that building was designed by Michelangelo himself. So it's an amazing hub of economics and also artwork during the time period. Now, just to give you a heads up, what we're talking about right now in this whole section is kind of why the Renaissance happened. The why as to before we get into its what, okay? So the why, of course, is that return of economics. We'll get into the what here in a second, as in what is the Renaissance and where did it start and where did it go. So going forward, though, Northern Europe also seeing a growth in power. Not like the southern areas of Europe, not particularly like Italy is seeing, but Northern Europe is seeing a growth in power. And they're becoming major political players as well, because nation states are slowly forming. So during this time period, coming out of the Middle Ages, Northern Europe wasn't nation states. When I say nation states, I mean Germany, France, England. Those are nation states. They're kingdoms, actually. And these kingdoms would oftentimes go to war with one another. For example, during the 100 Years' War, during the third phase of the 100 Years' War, half of France was owned by England. And it almost became a joint country of France and England because of that war, until the French, with, of course, the amazing leadership of Joan of Arc, were able to push many of the English out until their eventual surrender. Now, with that, though, you got to understand that these nation states are not like defined territory, defined borders, countries in a sense, but they are slowly getting there. Now, the big dogs that you still see holding all the power are your dynastic families, kings and queens, okay? Particularly in areas like France and also the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire being the biggest out of all of them, okay? And the Holy Roman Empire was provided mostly over by one family for hundreds of years. Of course, by one family, like the Medicis in Florence and the Sforza down in Milan. And so the Habsburgs ruled over the HRE in the most grandiose, sketchy, gross, and money-driven way that you could ever possibly understand. All right, so, and we'll get really into the Habsburg family and their clutches over the HRE later in the Reformation unit, when we begin to talk about the Golden Bull and the election of Charles V and his great extent over all of Spain, Holy Roman Empire, the Netherlands, what is now Luxembourg, and he basically owned like 30% of the world at any given moment, and he was a son of the Habsburg Empire. So the Habsburgs reigned supreme in HRE. They used wealth and marriages of convenience to usurp most of the power in Europe, okay? Now, most of the power in Northern Europe, anyway. So to give you an understanding of what is going on here, you gotta know where they pretty much started. So this guy is Maximilian, all right? That's Maximilian I, Holy Roman Emperor, and first Habsburg Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, okay? So when Maximilian I comes in, he immediately goes and gets married to I believe she's French, right? Is she French? Yeah, she's French. So Mary of Burgundy, all right? So as in Burgundy Street, as in where the area in the street in New Orleans is actually named after him. So Maximilian I married Mary of Burgundy, right? So you now have a man who controls the eastern region of France because of the Burgundy name. He also controls the Holy Roman Empire because of his statehood as the Holy Roman Emperor. And he also controls all of Austria. And this is through one marriage, right? But they didn't stop there because they eventually had a son. And his son, or Maximilian and Mary's son, was named Philip the Handsome. Yeah, no. All right, so doesn't look, he's not that handsome if you ask me. Now, anyway, but continuing forward, He then marries Joanna Castile of Spain, okay? Also known as Joanna the Mad, because she actually went mentally insane and died as a recluse. And they get married and eventually give birth to Charles II Castile, all right? So, and effectively, when they do this, they end up taking over Spain, the Netherlands, Eastern France, and all of the Holy Roman Empire, and then also all of Austria. So to back it out, that's what a marriage of convenience is, okay? They would marry their sons and daughters off to rulers of other areas to try and gain power through statehood, right? And they would usually always marry them off to rulers of countries that didn't have male heirs, right? So through those marriages, they ended up controlling Spain, this entire eastern region of France, the Burgundian region, the Holy Roman Empire, because Maximilian I was the original Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor, and then also this entire area going into Hungary all the way over here. So you're talking about most of Europe was controlled by the Habsburg family. Now, some of y'all are immediately probably asking yourself, well, how did they keep that power? Like, how is that possible? Well, they tended to keep it in the family, if you understand what I'm saying. As you can see, these arrows begin to cross over and intersect with only 2 family branches. So after this generation of Habsburgs, all of these people who are getting married and having children are all related. So they were keeping it in the family, marrying their cousins. And it actually led to a huge amount of genetic defects in the Habsburg family. Most notably, this thing called the Habsburg jaw, which we'll talk about later on. But this is the most famous Habsburg out of them all for his genetic offness. That's Carlos II. He's the last Habsburg ruler of Spain. So that Spain branch under Joanna the Mad, when one of their sons, when Philip the Handsome went and married Joanna the Mad, their last Habsburg heir to the throne is this guy, Carlos II. He apparently had a jaw so big because of these genetic defects that he couldn't talk until he was 8. He didn't walk until he was 4. And when he did talk, he drooled drooled very, very bad. And when he did talk, it was, like he could barely speak because he was so genetically inbred due to these marriages of convenience for them to try and take all of that land and then hold on to it, right? He was an impressive marksman, though, apparently. Apparently, he was a very, very good shot, right? So we'll talk about Carlos a little bit later on, though, again, when we get into the Reformation unit, because the Habsburg family does come up heavily when we get into the actual structure of the church and the Holy Roman Empire and things like that. So